Welcome to Tree Talking Time, where we talk all things tree dogs, from the smallest fights to the largest hounds, treating squirrels to bears and everything in between. And from time to time, we might even run a little fast game. How you doing, Rick?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm all right.
Good. I'm glad we finally got to talk.
Definitely. I'm looking forward to it because, like I said, being a leopard, I don't know, fancier myself. Obviously, he's a very critical part of the leopard history.
Right, yeah.
So definitely looking forward to kind of digging into some of what you remember growing up.
Well, I'm glad to help any way I can. I was there for nearly all of it. I don't, there are a lot of times that he, had adventures that I was not a part of, but he'd come home and talk about things. And he used to spend, back before there was an internet, people just called.
Yeah.
And, he would, since there was only one phone in the house, we had to sit there and listen to his side of the conversation. So some of that stuff sticks with you,
Yeah.
Of course, I fed the dogs and wormed puppies and vaccinated them and shipped them and built dog crates for years and years.
Yeah, I bet you did.
When I was a kid, and did a lot of hunting with him. Of course, when I got to be a teenager, I didn't. I sort of cut back on that because I was out with my friends.
Mm-hmm.
But one time I could walk in the woods up until I was 12, 13, 14 years old. I went with him pretty often.
Cool. Well, before we get too far into this, why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, my name is Rick McDuffie, and I am a retired now Presbyterian minister. I live in North Carolina, and I grew up in my parents' home, of course, as most of us did. And I was my dad was Richard McDuffie, the fairly well-known dog breeder and writer. He wrote for Full Cry magazine for many years. He had columns under several titles, but he had one called Breeding for Results, which was kind of a genetics thing. And then he wrote a Leopard Tree Dog News, early on. And then I remember he had one called McDuffie's Musings. So I think it just depended on what he had on his mind. But the Walkers were glad to hear, accept his submissions in most cases. I guess all cases.
Yeah. That is
S.L. Walker, was the publisher.
Okay.
For Full Cry for many years.
Gotcha. Actually,
I think they were out in Tennessee.
The June issue of Full Cry, as of right now, is slated to be the last. I did see somewhere that there is potentially a buyer, but somebody commented something on Facebook somewhere. But
wow.
But C&H Publishing that has been producing it for a number of years is closing. So.
Oh, how about that? I did not know that.
Well, like I said,
that would be the end of an era.
That is hot off the presses here. Like, you're not far behind the times.
Yeah. Well, with all the changes in social media, it's easy to understand. How they might have fallen on hard times.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I know the cost of printing, they said, weighed into it heavily. So.
Right.
But no, I just recently started writing for them. So, I mean, I was very sad to see it go because, I just started writing an article about it and submitting it to Full Cry. So.
Right. Well, I've clipped not all the issues, but I've clipped hundreds of my dad's articles out of, he saved the magazines, and we had a trove of them up in his attic, when Mom broke up housekeeping, and she said, "Do you want these?" And I said, "Yeah," but there were boxes and boxes of them because, he liked to save stuff, and and all of his articles were in there too. So rather than saving all the magazines, I just went in and clipped them, and so I've got hundreds of them.
That's awesome.
And what I hopefully at some point I'm going to, just for the family, my intention is to scan those and put them on a USB drive for the family have a piece of dad, so my children and grandchildren and their children can.
Well, if you ever get around to
know
that,
something about who he is and what he did,
Yeah. If you ever get around to that, maybe send one of them copies up here.
Well,
I would love to have all that.
Just remind me in a year or two. I'm only semi-retired. I'm still working, and so that's something I'm going to do when I fully retire.
Oh, I understand. That's quite the undertaking, as many articles as he wrote.
Yeah. Well, it's astounding that he did it so long. I wouldn't have done it that long, I'll tell you.
I mean, because I know he wrote from the 60s all the way up into the 90s at least. Yeah,
he did. And in fact, after 2000, he was still writing.
Okay. I wasn't sure.
Yeah, he got to the point that I guess most people, who kept up with him would know this because he mentioned it in some of his articles, but he got to the point that he couldn't get around in the woods. He had back trouble, and, I don't know how it's different in different parts of the country, but down here we have briars and vines and a lot of things in the woods and stumps and cypress knees and a lot of things in the woods that will trip you and throw you down. And he lost his confidence about navigating through the underbrush. And when I was a kid, we'd walk 5 or 6, 10 miles on a hunt, because the dogs might get, out of hearing, and you just have to go try to find them. And then you got to walk out. If you went to the tree, that sometimes is a long way. I used to hate it when the dogs would tree so far away that you could barely hear them. And I knew we were going to have to go in there because they wouldn't leave until you did. And so, we just buckle up and go. But by the time he got into his 60s, he wasn't able to walk that kind of distance anymore.
Oh yeah, no, I understand. So how old were you when your dad started the Leopard project?
I can't remember. I remember when he got the Nimrod dog.
Okay.
And I must have been about the first grade.
Okay. So you were pretty young then.
Yeah. So I was probably 6 years old. I'm 60. I'm about to turn 68. So that was 62 years ago. And he went down to Texas. I've got him telling, not an audio recording, but I've got it in some of his writings.
Yeah.
He tells the story of who went with him, but they were way down in South Texas, to find these dogs that he had heard about. No doubt. I mean, I'm just guessing that he read about some dogs down there in Full Cry. Mm-hmm. That was the source of all tree dog news in those days.
Yeah. Long before the internet.
Yeah. And so he went down there, and I remember him telling the story that he heard these puppies running. I think they were under a year old, but they were out, after something. And Nimrod was one of them, and I think there was one or two other dogs he brought back from that trip. And so I was, we were living in Fayetteville, North Carolina at the time, and he had some, he had been interested in cur dogs, but he couldn't find what he considered to be an old time cur dog,
Okay.
So, but he had a couple of Catahoulas, and he was doing some hog hunting, wild hog hunting back then.
Yeah.
And they were, I think he got those dogs from Tom Stodgill down in Texas.
Yeah.
You may have heard his name.
I have.
The Catahoulas. Mm-hmm. But once he got Nimrod and Nimrod's litter mates, then, the thing headed in an entirely different direction, and he got rid of the Catahoulas. They were kind of just, hog catch dogs anyway.
Gotcha.
They weren't really, they were not what he was looking for, and he just was experimenting at that point in time. But I think once he got hold of Nimrod and started breeding on him, then, he was off to the races at that point.
Yep.
Found what he was looking for.
Definitely. I've heard that, and I don't know if the name Richard Bailey sounds familiar to you or not.
Not right off, no.
Richard got a lot of dogs from your dad, and spoke with him fairly regularly. And actually, Richard told me he's like, because of the, the long distance, the cost of long distance. He goes, we wrote a lot of letters.
Yeah. Dad used to get a lot of letters from people, and they'd be 6 and 7 pages long.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, that's right. And long distance calling in those days was expensive. You're right.
Yeah. Well, because Richard's from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and he's a bear hunter up there, and
yeah.
So, but he
came
down and to the leopard den, and then plus when your dad went up there for their So.
Yeah, I remember Dad. Dad would get in his truck and drive to Missouri or Wisconsin or Michigan. And I remember him going up to Michigan on some hunts. So he was probably up there with that guy Richard Bailey.
Yeah.
Or to Texas. He would do that like I go to town to Walmart.
Yeah.
I'd call home and Mom would say, where's Dad? And she'd say, well, he's on a bear hunt in Wisconsin.
just another Tuesday.
He was always very clear with this about me. He didn't enjoy killing animals. He just wanted to work the dogs.
Yeah,
and that was his thing. So, but he also was aware that if you didn't shoot the coon out, the dogs they needed to taste the kill.
Mm-hmm.
They would lose their motivation to. I guess it's not politically correct to say that kind of stuff now, but But the dogs would lose their motivation if you didn't. You had to shoot the coon out. So, and that's the only reason that Dad did. And by the way, he shot a .22 pistol most of the time.
Okay.
Yeah, he had a
shot.
Well, he was, but it was a target type Ruger with a long barrel. It looked like a German Luger,
mm-hmm.
and it was rifled, and it was very accurate.
Nice.
In fact, I've got the gun now.
That's pretty cool. So, what else do you remember about growing up with all these leopard dogs? Any other dogs stand out besides Nimrod?
Well, some of the better dogs that he remembered. He hunted Nimrod a while, and he was an exceptional dog. But I remember his veterinarian down in Fayetteville said, "You're foolish to keep hunting him because he can get run over, by a car, or, hurt in a fight, and you've lost your stud dog, your foundational stud dog." So,
mm-hmm.
Dad quit hunting him after maybe 3 years or so. I mean, if Dad was here, he'd say, "No, you're remembering it wrong." But that's my best memory of how it went.
Actually, that was kind of the reason I brought Richard up. Was he told me that your dad had quit hunting Nimrod at a fairly young age once he realized how good of a stud dog he was.
Yeah, that's right. Because he just threw remarkably consistent pups, and so anyway, yeah, he quit. I would estimate that by the time Nimrod was 5 years old or so, he wasn't hunting him anymore.
Yeah.
But so once he was out of the hunting lineup, I think that he had a litter mate named Cleopatra, female named Cleopatra, who was a litter mate to Nimrod, who's another one of those dogs that Dad brought back from Texas. And so I remember him. He had a dog who became a good stud dog for him. He called him the Gold Nugget, and he was a good dog. But Dad had spent so much money on him. He had so many health problems when he was a puppy, just weird off the wall stuff.
Okay.
That he named him the Gold Nugget because he had spent so many dollars on him trying to get him straightened out. But he was a remarkably good dog.
I've seen him in some pedigrees.
Oh, have you? Yeah.
I went when I got my first leopards. I kind of dug deep into their history and their pedigree, and I have some of their. I can trace some of those dogs all the way back to like Nimrod.
Yeah, yeah. You sent me some pictures from looked like a bench show or a hunt that you were attending, and one of those dogs looked remarkably like Nimrod to me. But I like the way they all looked, but I don't remember. I think a woman maybe was holding that dog, showing him, but I just thought he looked very much like the dogs that I remember my dad having in the '60s. Dad got a dog from out in Indiana, and he called him Hoosier Buck.
Okay.
And you may have heard. I imagine he has shown up in a lot of pedigrees as well. But he had a big ball mouth, and there was a big dog, as I remember, long legs, and he was a mighty good dog for Dad. And in terms of just a hunting dog, I'm sure he bred him some too, but he certainly was just one of my dad's favorite hunting dogs. And he'd stay on a tree. I used to hate for Buck to tree because I knew we were going to be there all night.
Yeah,
because you couldn't call him out, and you'd have to go to him. And he had, when you treed, it was like, oh, it sounded like a tuba down in the woods.
Yeah. No, I actually think I've seen a stud ad for him. I have a couple of full cries from the '60s, and I think there was a stud ad in one of them for him.
Yeah, and I don't know what Buck's. I couldn't tell you what his origins were. I mean, I'm sure one of the things Dad did was that he tried to network with people who had because you can't breed dogs by yourself.
No.
You've got to cooperate, and you need new blood, hybrid vigor when you're breeding. So, he would, and this had to happen through full cry. There was no other mechanism for it back then. But he tried to network with people around the country who had that type of dog,
Yeah.
And he wasn't ever interested in having being a hound man or breeding to hounds, or, he was committed to finding, the old time general purpose cur dog that existed before there were, plot registries and walker registries and blue tick and red bone registries or whatever, you may, or black and tan or whatever, but before there was any of that, there was the cur dog. Yep. And so his intention was always to try to find good dogs of that type to which he could breed, Nimrod, and of course you've got to go out and try to find some females, to breed to your stud.
Yeah, definitely. That's one of the reasons I prefer a female, because you can have the best stud dog in the world, but unless you go promote him a lot and win a lot of night hunts or something, people aren't lining up at your door unless you do all that. So,
right.
If you got a good female, you can find a good male.
Right. Yeah, makes sense to me. And of course, if you've got this stud dog and you're only breeding him to the females that you have, even and then you start line breeding on him. Your gene pool gets pretty small, in a hurry. And some line breeding is important, but you need to know when to quit it, and bring in some new blood.
I've heard that your dad was like way ahead of his time as far as knowledge of genetics.
Well, he always tried to learn. He didn't have a college degree in genetics or anything, but he read constantly. I've got 3 books on how to breed dogs here in my house. That when Dad passed away, Mom said, "If there's any of that dog stuff that you want, you're welcome to it."
Yeah.
And so I loaded it up and brought it here, and so but he was constantly, it was a normal thing to be sitting and, in a room with him when I was a child or a teenager, and for him to have his nose in a book on dog genetics.
Mm-hmm.
And so, he was trying to actually learn the science of the thing and not just, say, well, I've got a good dog and you've got a good dog. Let's breed mine to yours and see what happens.
Yep.
He had a much deeper understanding and scientific understanding of what needed to be done, and was always trying to learn more.
Like I said, somebody that was just on the podcast a couple weeks ago, Alan Reeves, who had some Camus Curs from your dad, said he was light years ahead of everybody back then.
Well, I appreciate that. I think that's probably true.
So
I don't know anybody else that was writing any articles on genetics and full cry. Most of what I read in there were, Tree and Feist News or something like that.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden here's something on, chromosomes and, how to breed better dogs.
Yep. Hey, I think we all need those lessons, though. There's a lot of us that could use some lessons in genetics.
Yeah. So, I wish he was here to talk to you about this. He would enjoy talking about it.
Oh, I wish
I'll do the best I can.
That podcasts were around back then. There's so many guys that would have been like your dad's age that would have been around for the a lot of the early years of these different curs and hound breeds and the way things kind of have gotten to where they are today. And it's like, they're no longer here. And
Dad was, he was very opinionated about the right way to do a thing. And I'm sure that, I know that he had his detractors. There were people who didn't necessarily agree with him. And sometimes he probably said things that weren't complimentary toward certain breeds. He didn't care for hounds in general.
Gotcha.
And so, I mean, it wasn't, he used to say, well, we also had horses. Mm-hmm. And Dad used to say the only reason that a person would ride a quarter horse is because they don't know any better. So quarter horse people don't like to hear stuff like that.
No.
And I think he would have said the same thing about cur dogs, that, leopard dogs or whatever term you want to use. But I'm talking about the old timey general purpose,
Yep.
hunting dog or, a lot of those dogs would work stock too back in the day.
Yep.
People did that kind of thing. But he would probably have said, well, the only reason a person would, own or hunt a hound is because they didn't know there was anything any better, And so I think he tried to develop a better dog. Mm-hmm. But what he was really trying to do is to get back to the dog that was. It wasn't that he was trying to do something entirely new. And the reason that, that there was a leopard cur instead of just a cur dog is that, the dogs that I think that he found that were of that type, were blue merle.
Yeah.
And so that became kind of, especially in the early days, that was something he was real committed to.
Mm-hmm.
The Nimrod was, a beautiful example of that type of coloring.
Yep. Granted, I've obviously never seen a colored photo of him, but seen a few photos that were, and you can obviously tell he was a merle dog.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I guess my mom's got it, but at some point, someone had taken a photograph of him and of Nimrod, mm-hmm. and had traced his silhouette somehow onto, these magnetic signs that people put on their refrigerators.
Yeah.
That magnetic material is plastic blend with some magnetized stuff. And so this thing had been cut out, and then whoever it was had hand painted his coloring on that thing.
Oh.
And it's stuck on the side of a file cabinet at my mom's house. And of course, when Dad was living, it was there too, for years. And I don't know what she's done with it, but I'd love to get hold of it. I need to.
Yeah.
I'll ask her about it next time. My mom's going to turn 90 in October.
Wow.
And so she's still kicking, and she trimmed her own shrubbery the other day while I mowed her grass. So she's doing good.
That's awesome. So how old would your dad be today if he was still alive?
He would turn 90 next month.
Okay.
Yeah, his birthday is July 31st.
Gotcha. Now, what do you know about his old-time farm shepherd project?
Well, I've got some of those dogs.
Well, and that's actually kind of how I found you. You posted something in I don't know if it was an old time, like an English Shepherd group or an old time Scottish Collie group. I don't know, some sort of Collie farm shepherd group.
He was always interested in those dogs too. Dad just is into he was into the heritage breeds, and he felt like registries had messed up a lot of dogs, and he viewed registry. I'm gonna get to your question in just a minute, but it's a good time to make this point. I think Daddy viewed registries as a way of keeping breeding records, and nothing more than that. And so, it's too much trouble for an individual to keep his or her own breeding records. So, that's why registries existed. Is so, when I breed this dog to that dog, 20 years down the road, we can remember what we did.
Yeah.
It needs to be written down somewhere. That's where you get a pedigree from. But registries, like, AKC is its own, disaster as far as I'm concerned.
I think most people would agree with you.
But once you get into breed standards, I think breed standards are important because otherwise you don't know what kind of dog you've got. But it's very easy for the registry to start wagging the dog, pun intended.
Yeah.
For the tail to start wagging the dog, the registry is supposed to work with the breeder rather than the other way. I think that, Dad had always been interested in old time farm shepherds too. I mean, they were, as he often said, when he was a boy, they were everywhere.
Yeah.
Everybody had a shepherd dog.
No, you're right. Everyone had either a cur dog or a shepherd dog. If you look in history, you look in old photos, they're all either a cur dog looking dog or they're a shepherd looking dog.
Yeah, yeah. And people just called them shepherds, or sheepdog. I had a friend over here from Wales who saw, from Wales in the UK.
Yeah.
And he saw, my dogs, and I said, "What does that dog look like to you?" He said, "Sheepdog." It was kind of funny. He didn't say border collie or what have you, but I don't. There are registries there as well, but by the same token, people just, I just got back from there. By the way, 2 of my daughters live over there, and I saw several shepherd-looking dogs, and on 2 occasions I asked people what they were, and they said border collies, but they weren't the hyper, sort of jazzed up sort of border collie we have here. They're more like what we would call an English shepherd in this country.
Okay.
Yeah, but Dad, when I was a boy, I was about 7 years old. Dad bought me an English shepherd. I guess he was ostensibly bought it for me and my sister, but her name was Jane, and Jane became my dog. She went everywhere with me, and if I shifted my feet, she moved too. And I think even back then he was thinking that the English shepherds were probably closer to what he remembered as an old time farm shepherd when he was a boy.
Yeah.
But he had networked with some people to try to get back to your question, and I'm just going randomly here. He had networked with some people again through Full Cry, just asking if anyone knew where there were any dogs of that type. And he found some out in Tennessee, and went out there and brought 3 or 4 puppies back.
Okay.
And I actually came across some pictures of him sitting there with those puppies at his feet. My best memory is that this was in the late 80s when this was taking place. It was about the time that he had quit coon hunting, but he still, they wanted to do dog stuff.
Yeah.
and he still had the Camus dogs at that time.
Okay.
And of course, I went up to Canada with him and to South Texas with him, networking with some of those cur dog people from, that he was breeding those dogs with way back then. That was around 1987 or 8, somewhere in that range.
Okay.
So, anyway.
We'll come back to that.
So all this was happening about the same time. I think the Shepherd Project was a little bit later in time than when he was working with the Canadian and the Texas dogs. Mm-hmm. And when I say Texas, it was right down on the border, around Laredo. That's where those yellow dogs came from. But anyhow, so he met these folks out in Tennessee. There was a lady who had been breeding shepherds for many years, and I've got that story clipped out of the Full Cry magazine somewhere. But she still had a few, and so he actually bought some vaccine and worm medicine and took it with him and vaccinated and wormed the puppies when he picked them up, then brought them back to South Carolina. And he selected a male out of that group that he called Old Shep, that he thought was the sharpest tool in the shed. Mm-hmm. And he was going to work with him and try to develop these old time farm shepherds again.
Yeah.
And he raised 2 or 3 litters off of Shep. He had to go out and do an outcross and find some English Shepherd females that he thought were representative of, fairly representative of the breed and or the type dog he was looking for. Mm-hmm. And so he bred to them. There were some pups out of those 2 or 3 litters, and then he was writing about it and promoting it that was his style. He liked to promote what he was doing. Somebody came and stole the dog right out from their house.
Jeez.
Yeah, never seen again.
Now,
so that kind of put an end to that thing. But dog breeders can be a jealous lot and very territorial and protective.
Oh yeah.
But Daddy always thought that he was stolen. I mean, the evidence was that he was stolen.
Gotcha. I think I remember reading somewhere that your dad crossed Shep with a leopard.
No, I don't think so.
Okay. I thought I had read that somewhere.
I don't believe so. Someone may have said that, but I don't believe that is true.
Okay.
Things get said sometimes.
Oh, yeah. No, I understand that. That's why I was asking about it.
Yeah. No, he was always looking for other types of shepherd dogs.
Gotcha.
To breed to Shep. And of course that thing didn't, I think once Shep disappeared the way he did, it sort of took the wind out of Dad's sails about continuing that project. And he and I were getting back into the horses at that time, and we went to Alabama and got several. And, you only got time to do so many things.
Oh, yeah.
And so, we went in the horse direction. I've still got 6 here now of descendants of those that he and I picked up back in the early 90s.
Other than dogs and horses, did your dad ever fool with anything else as far as, livestock or dog, or I don't know?
No. He loved dogs and he loved horses, and he had his opinions about, which were the best. He was if the crowd was going one way, he would figure out a way to go in another direction. he didn't follow the crowd, and he he was always looking for something better than what the crowd had.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to figure out what that would be.
Gotcha.
So we had the leopard cur dogs, and he called them that back in the '60s, and then I think that sort of changed to leopard tree dog because some people didn't like the name cur, because of the connotation.
Mm-hmm.
And he always said that people who felt that way did not understand what the term meant.
Yeah.
To say a cur dog didn't necessarily mean that it was a worthless dog. It just, the term meant something entirely different in the 1800s than it does today.
Yeah.
And so, so he was interested in the leopards, and then he got connected with some folks up in Canada and with some cowboy types down in near Laredo and Alice, Texas, in that area down there, who had yellow curs. And so he thought, well, let's see if we can do the best. We need some new blood here, and let's breed some of these dogs and see, because he knew that these were serious dog breeders, all of them were.
Yeah.
And so he said, let's see if we can do a better job.
Nice.
So that's how that came to be.
Oh, and Alan, who had those Camus dogs, he was singing their praises, and unfortunately, I don't know of anybody that still has them today.
Yeah. Unless something like that really needs someone who promote it.
Mm-hmm.
And without, I think you understand what I'm saying here.
Oh yeah.
I've started a lot of things in my time that did really well as long as I was managing it.
Oh yeah.
But when I try to turn it over to someone else,
mm-hmm.
it didn't do so well later on. And so I think you have to have other people who will join in and want to be a part of a thing like that.
Yep.
And of course, compared to the time that he invested in the leopards in the '60s and '70s, he did not spend a great many years working with the Camus dogs.
Okay.
And that was fairly short-lived, and he was nearing the end of his hunting abilities.
Gotcha.
By the time they got into that. So, when I was a kid, he'd hunt 3 or 4 nights a week during the season.
Yeah.
I can remember getting up to go to school, and he was just coming in. He'd fall in the creek or something.
Well,
drop the rifle,
Unfortunately for your dad, he didn't have these modern conveniences that we do today. I got a Garmin that tells me right where the dog is, and when the dog's where I don't want him, I hit a tone button and he comes back to me.
Oh man, yeah. Well, he did. He did have a lot of stuff. I was thinking, some of the stuff we've done in the past. At one point, he had a carbide light.
Mm-hmm.
That was the type light that it burned carbide, and
yep.
it was a mining light really, and he wore a miner's helmet with it.
Yep.
And you may remember at one point he had a big battery that he wore on his hip. Mm-hmm. And then he had a little lamp on his head, which was also a coal mining thing. And so, those guys had that back in those days, and he had a tracking collar. I can remember him having tracking collars. So
yeah,
if a dog got lost, he would know where he was, but there was no GPS transmitter.
No, coon hunting and it definitely looks a little different today with the GPS. Like even with like a shock collar or electronic training collar, whatever you want to call them. It's built right into the same system a lot of times, and then LED lights that are brighter than anything those guys back then could have ever imagined.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah, it's much easier to spot a coon in the tree if you've got a bright light.
Yep.
I was telling my wife the other day, we went by development. The name of it was Foxfire. And I said, do you know what Foxfire is? And she said, no. And I said, well, we used to be out coon hunting in the woods, and we'd shine the light up there, and we'd see what looked like a coon's eye looking back at us. And but it wasn't a coon; it was Foxfire. Reflecting that light. And so people have, we're getting so sophisticated these days that people like me who remember what that was like, or I'm sure that it's the same with you, but if you spend a lot of time in the woods, you would. But the general public doesn't know about these things.
No. The general public doesn't even know what coon hunting is today.
I'm sorry?
I said the general public doesn't even know what coon hunting is today.
No, that's true. In fact, yeah, that's right. I'm a retired minister, so when I tell stories about growing up, and I'll start to tell some coon hunting story,
mm-hmm.
and then I'll think, no, I probably shouldn't tell that because they won't understand. They really don't get it. So I'll maybe tell a story about a ball game instead. They can understand
that. I've got a preacher from South Carolina up here. He tells some old stories. He grew up in the South, and it's kind of funny because some of the people, you can tell some of the stories just don't resonate with some people.
Yeah, that's the truth. I'll tell a story sometimes, and they just get blank stares back. Well, we don't even understand those words.
Yeah.
I don't know. May I just ask, what's coon hunting like in your part of the world? Do you still have big woods that
oh no,
that you can hunt in, or is everything fenced and heavily timbered?
No, it's kind of rural suburbia. Like you kind of have this patchwork of some farmland still, but then you have these big areas of housing developments, and
right,
where it's like, or you have like the one farm I hunt, it has a housing development that borders it, so it's hunt, in the wintertime when there's no leaves, I can see a whole row of houses from the woods.
Oh yeah,
and so it's
that's
unfortunately not like the old
it's getting
days.
harder, isn't it, to find a place to go?
Yes.
Yeah. We used to literally, when I was a kid, we'd be going down the road and it wasn't too unusual for Daddy to have dogs in the truck, and of course I saw somebody going by the other day with a manufactured, aluminum dog box on the back of their truck, and I said, when I was a kid, that didn't exist. You either had to, build one yourself or have it built, and it was normally built out of plywood. And so, the world's changed a lot. But anyway, but it wasn't unusual for Dad to just, see a coon cross the road and drop the tailgate and turn the dogs loose, or,
oh yeah,
and he may or may not know whose land it was, but people didn't care because normally the coons were eating the, corn, causing damage, and they wanted them caught. And people trusted each other back then. They didn't think you were up to no good if they heard dogs. They knew what you were doing. If country people would hear a pack of dogs working, and they would know what it was.
Yep. At the same point, a lot of times you knew majority of your neighbors, or even, and when I say neighbors, I'm talking people within the same county. You knew everybody. So or if you didn't know them, it was like, oh well, that's so and so's cousin. So it's you only one or two people removed from knowing them. So it was like whatever.
Sure. Yeah. Yep.
But no, coon hunting looks a little different today.
Yeah, I'm sure it does.
The competition hunts have gotten bigger. There's hunts that you can literally win $100,000. There was one.
Wow.
Was it last weekend or the weekend before? And a guy won $100,000 first place.
Man.
So, and that's not the first time he's done it with that dog.
Yeah, right day. Huh.
So that dog has won trucks. Dog's won probably over. I don't really know what Echo's total winnings are, but I would imagine they're over $400,000.
That's wild. So. Yeah. Oh.
So it looks a little different.
That's the kind of dog that you want to keep locked up.
Exactly.
You know, because I've always wondered what somebody would do if they stole a dog like that, because you can't take him anywhere. Everybody recognizes the dog, know who he belongs to.
Yeah.
You know?
You're exactly right.
It's like stealing a work of art, you know? You steal the Mona Lisa, who are you going to show it to?
Yep. It's going to sit in your basement where no one sees it.
Ben, I've got something that might be of some interest to you, and I'll just offer this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether you've seen this or heard of it. I was down at my mom's a few months ago when we were looking through some of Dad's records, and she pulled out a briefcase that he kept some of his stuff in. There was a photo album in there, and nothing that would be terribly interesting to you, I don't think. But there was a guy. I want to say he was in Indiana or Illinois, and Dad had gone out there to a hunt, and it was some sort of competition hunt. Dad didn't have any dogs in the hunt. He just went out there to visit his friends and talk,
Mm-hmm.
network. Yep. We call it networking today. And this guy recorded it, the whole conversation. He and Dad talked the whole time that they were listening to these dogs work. And
that's cool.
I think Dad knew some of the dogs in the cast. But anyway, as they were listening to the dogs, this guy was also pumping Dad for information about, some of the things that you've been talking to me about.
Yeah.
And so he recorded it on a cassette recorder, and then he transcribed it verbatim on a typewriter. I couldn't believe the care that he took, to do it.
Yeah.
And so I found that, and I said, Mom, I got to have a copy of this. So I brought it home, and I've got it here, and I think I actually have it on a memory stick. If I can find it, and I think you'd be interested in reading it. But basically, he just was pumping Daddy about, the history of the breed, and who he thought the some of the same questions you've asked me, some of the most notable dogs, and of course, one of the things I intended to do today as I was preparing to talk to you tonight was to sit down with that and just review some things that I thought might help, But I'd be glad if I can find that. I'd be glad to share it with you.
Yeah, I would love to see that.
I think it's good, historical information, and it's straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak.
Exactly. That's there was the 2000. It was I just looked at it. I think it's the July 2003 cover of Full Cry. It's a picture of I think there's 10 people or something, and your dad's one of them. And it's basically all like the legends of the 80s and 90s.
Weren't they the writers?
A lot of them were. Yes.
I think it was Full Cry had done it, and it was a lot of the guys that had done the writing, and I've seen that picture. I think I've got that magazine.
And I've tried to talk to a lot of the people, or like in your case, and also in the case of Bill Barger, like Bill passed away a couple years ago. So I talked to his son, Stacy. So I'm trying to talk to you guys just because it's like those were the legends of the cur and feist world. And so trying to glean some information on these different cur and feist breeds and kind of how they all came about, and just the old stories about how it all kind of came together. And so I find it really interesting. Like I said, I'm only 33 years old, so I obviously wasn't around in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And even I was a little kid in the 90s, so by the time I kind of got into the dogs, like the internet was big, and a lot of those guys didn't quite make that jump. So
yeah. I wish Dad was around now. He loved. He wouldn't do any word processing. I'll tell you that. Here's how he used to write those articles. He wrote them in longhand and gave them to my mom, and she typed them and sent them to S.L. Walker at Full Cry. And so, Mom said, "I typed every one of those articles."
Maybe I need to get your mom on here. If she typed them all, she's probably a walking encyclopedia.
Well, I don't know. It probably went in one ear and out the other with her. But she remembers more than she lets on, because sometimes I'll say, "Mama, what about that dog?" And she'll say, "Well, I think that dog came from, so and so." But, there are times she doesn't have any memory of it either.
Yeah.
I've actually got one of Dad's, when I was a kid, I used to love to go to water races with him. Have you ever done one of those?
Yeah.
Yeah. And he'd won a bunch of trophies at water races. And to me, that was an exciting thing, And when I'm talking to, when I was 6, 7, 8 years old.
Yeah.
And so I've got one of his, I think it's a water race trophy, or it could be a night hunt trophy on my mantle here that he won up in Virginia.
Oh,
but awesome. That would have been 1961 or 2. I was first or second grade.
Yep. Now I've got a 6-year-old, and he loves to watch a water race. It's his favorite thing to watch.
Yeah. That appeals to a little boy, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Or the little boy in a man, in a grown man.
Yep.
Yeah. I'll be glad to look and see if I can find that. I believe I saved I scanned that transcription of that conversation. And I loved it, because when I went back and read it, it was just like talking to my dad. I could hear his voice.
Yep.
And so it was a good thing. And
I can imagine.
If I can find it, I'm happy to share it with you.
I'd love to see it. Now, do you have any more good stories about your dad or in the dogs or anything?
I would just say this about Dad. He just, in terms of stories, I don't know that I have. I got tons of stories about him. He was just, I'll say this, a couple of different things here. He was the end of a dying breed of man, I think, in my opinion. My dad was a pastor, and, that permeated every part of his life, so he was concerned for people, and he tried to do the right thing. But he was also very opinionated, and he would say what he thought, and if people didn't like it, well, that was all right too, But he grew up out in the woods. Literally, on the edge of a state forest, and that was thousands and thousands of acres. And he just, there were a lot of people in his house when he was a boy, and he always liked outdoors better than indoors.
Okay.
And that continued through his life. If the house was crowded, he just left and stayed in the woods all day, unless he had work to do. And so he was a pastor, but he was also an outdoorsman. My sister used to say that he was like Daniel Boone and Billy Graham rolled into one. And that might be a bit extreme, but there's certainly he certainly was a woodsman in the true sense of the word. He was just as comfortable down in the swamp when it was 35 degrees and dark as could be, and trying to find the dogs that were treed. He was just as comfortable doing that as he would be in the pulpit on Sunday morning.
Mm-hmm.
And he could, he had friends from all walks of life. I remember one coon hunting friend of his was a bootlegger and a moonshiner. And, but he could also sit down and talk to the president of the university,
Yep.
and make conversation with him. So he was just uniquely gifted in that way, and he was a great father. I'm very thankful for him. But tons of stories. I don't know how to pick one or two to tell you.
Nah, I wish I would have been able to talk to him because he sounds like quite the man. That's for sure.
Yeah, thank you.
And like I said, that's from what you've told me, from what Richard Bailey's told me, from what Alan Reeves has told me. So I mean, this is multiple people that have said that he was very, very smart, knew dog breeding inside and out, and could tell you all about it. And I would love to have an education. True. That's for sure.
Well, I was thinking today, as I was thinking about our call tonight, I was thinking today that his memory of where he got a dog and who he got the dog from and who was with him when he got the dog. Mm-hmm. What the name of the town in Ohio where he went to pick the dog, or what have you. It was just incredible. That was just, he just had a memory that wouldn't quit. And I've been blessed with some of that, but I don't think I'm nearly as sharp as he was in terms of being able to remember chapter and verse and stuff like that. I wish he was here, and I know you do too. He could speak with great specificity about some of these things that I remember them in general, but
I understand.
He could certainly do that for you.
No, but I do appreciate you taking the time to tell me what you do remember and talk about your dad.
I'll tell you what, if I send this information to you, you're certainly welcome to peruse it. And if you see things in there you want to talk more about, I'd be glad to, talk with you specifically about some of that stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
What I remember about it. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I was busy being a kid and a teenager when some of this stuff was going on. So, if I were to, if I had been a grown man at the time and able to really, focus, probably would have a lot more to offer. But, I was a professional young'un.
Yep. But the hunting dogs just never quite bit you?
In terms of continuing to breed and so forth?
Yeah.
No, not really. I've got my own stuff going on. I became a musician when I was a kid and played in rock bands, when I was a teenager. That started when I was about 13.
Gotcha.
So that would have been in 1967 or 8. And then I majored in music in college, and then I went into ministry. So between my hobby of playing music and my profession, my vocation of, pastoring churches, I just didn't have much time left, for hunting. I loved going with him on occasion, but, sort of like my dad said about horses, he said, there are a lot of people that want to ride horses if someone else will, keep the horses and feed the horses and vaccinate the horses and groom the horses and saddle the horses. They're glad to come and ride, but
that's me.
Yeah,
you keep that horse over there. You feed it. I'll come ride. That's fine.
Well, that's the way it is with dogs. Was with dogs for me. I love to go hunting with Daddy and his dogs, but I wasn't going to keep dogs.
I understand.
I had that's a full-time thing. Really to keep them and work them and keep them in good shape and all of that. And I had other things going on at my time, but we are raising some English shepherds. They're registered English shepherds, but they've got some of the old time farm shepherd, Dunrovin Old Shep.
Okay. Yeah.
So Old Shep is in their pedigree on the top side.
Yep. Awesome.
Yeah. So we're still sort of, my wife and I are still involved in that. We haven't. I actively bred English shepherds for probably 15 years, but then I got out of it about 12 or 13 years ago, just because my girls were in college and I'd lost my free help.
Gotcha.
And but we just picked up a new female recently, so I hope to raise a litter or two out of her.
Now, out of curiosity, do you do any herding or hunting with your English Shepherds?
No, not well.
Just curious.
If I'm walking in the woods and they see a squirrel, they'll treat it.
Okay.
You know, but I was talking to a friend, a dog breeding friend in Oklahoma the other day, and she said, "You need to shoot that squirrel out because for the same reason I was telling you earlier.
Yep.
You know, you don't shoot the coon out or shoot the squirrel out, the dog's not going to, understand really what it is that you want to do." So, this little female I've got right now, we were walking the other day, and all of a sudden she's fast. She took off just like she had been shot out of a cannon. And I thought, where is she going? And she ran right up under this big pecan tree. And then I saw she went around on the other side. Here came the squirrel around on this side.
Nice.
You know how squirrels will do that thing, with whichever side the dog's on, the squirrel's on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just had a big laugh about that. But I might be getting into the squirrel hunting here.
There you go. Now, I feel very much like your dad in the fact that I've always, I don't know, the cur dog and the old collie type dogs have always intrigued me, and I think it's just because I like like you said, like your dad, that history of those are the dogs that used to be around, and it wasn't necessarily like this bred a certain way. They were just what everyone had. They were just the run of the mill, multi-purpose dog that did everything, and I don't know why, but that multi-purpose dog that can bring the cows in but can go tree a coon or a squirrel just intrigues me, and that's kind of what has led me to where I'm at, and some of the dogs that I have, and also just the people that I talk to on this podcast, or sometimes the people that have these versatile dogs that are a little goofy. Like, it's not the normal thing, because most people are like, oh yeah, they're just a coon hunter, or they're raising just a stock dog, and it's not. And here I am, like, talking to people that are using dogs for a little bit of everything.
Yeah, I do think dogs, became more specialized over time. And, there was a time, as you well know, that it wasn't too long ago that people wouldn't, a lot of people couldn't afford economically to support an animal on the farm that wasn't working.
Yep.
I've heard people say, I'm not going to feed a dog that, is not going to herd or hunt or do something.
Mm-hmm.
And there wasn't, these days people have pets and, they want to be the dog's mama or,
Yep.
It's like when the kids go off to college and they, we'll get some dogs and they'll be our children now. And so, small animal veterinarians are making a killing, treating people's dogs and cats. Well, in not too distant history, that would not have happened because people couldn't afford that.
Mm-hmm.
If something wasn't producing, it wasn't going to be fed on the farm.
Yeah.
But so a general purpose dog that could do all kinds of work, was a highly prized thing.
Yep.
And dogs were expected to work, where that's no longer the case.
Exactly.
And you didn't ask me this, but I'm just I'll throw this in there while we're talking. People have behavior problems with their dogs, and the dogs are anxious and, upset, and, they'll tear up the house, and things like that. As far as I believe it's true that in many cases that's a result of the dog not having a job or a function. Why we all want to know why we're here, what it is we're created to do. And if a dog just relegated to being an ornament, they may get confused about that.
Yep.
And frustrated.
And if you look at people that have working dogs that actually give their dog a job, oftentimes those dogs are very well balanced, well mannered dogs. oftentimes you see these people that have uncontrolled pets. It's because those dogs have all kinds of energy. They have nowhere to let it out, and they have no idea what they're supposed to do.
If you're bred to be a rat terrier and you're, no one will let you chase a rat, what are you going to do?
Yep, exactly.
Ben, thanks a lot, man. Great to talk to you, and let's stay in touch.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
You might want to talk again after I share this stuff.
Oh yeah, I have a feeling there will be a follow up to this episode. So.
Okay. All right. Well, take care, and God bless you.
Thank you. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Tree Talking Media. And until next time, keep them talking in the timber.